In the grand kingdom of Valdoria, where ancient laws still govern the modern world, one whispered accusation can topple a throne that has stood for centuries. When Queen Consort Isabella Montclair makes a shocking claim about the true parentage of Princess Elena, the kingdom's beloved heir, she unknowingly triggers a forgotten law that could destroy everything she holds dear. What begins as palace gossip quickly spirals into a constitutional crisis that threatens not just Isabella's freedom, but the very foundation of the Valdorian monarchy. As court intrigue meets ancient justice, and family loyalty clashes with royal duty, the question remains, in a world where bloodlines determine destiny, how far would you go to protect a secret that could change everything? The crown has never felt heavier, and the truth has never been more dangerous. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Montclair Palace as Queen Consort Isabella adjusted her pearl necklace for the third time. The grand mirror in her private chambers reflected a woman who had spent 15 years perfecting the art of royal composure, yet today something felt different. The weight of the crown jewels seemed heavier, the silk of her emerald gown more constraining than usual. Isabella had married into the Valdorian royal family when she was 23, a young duchess from a neighboring kingdom who brought both political alliance and genuine love to King Marcus Montclair. Their marriage had been celebrated throughout the realm, and, when Princess Elena was born 2 years later, the succession seemed secured for generations to come. But, secrets have a way of festering in the halls of power, and, today, Isabella carried one that had grown too heavy to bear alone. The morning's agenda included the weekly Council of Lords meeting, followed by a charity luncheon and an evening reception for visiting dignitaries. Standard royal duties that Isabella had performed countless times before. Yet as she walked through the corridors adorned with portraits of Montclair ancestors, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. "Your Majesty," called Lady Catherine Ashford, Isabella's longtime friend and lady-in-waiting, hurrying to catch up with her measured steps. "The council is assembled and waiting for your presence." Isabella paused, her hand resting on the ornate handle of the council chamber doors. Beyond these doors sat the 12 most powerful lords of Valdoria, men who had served the crown for decades and held the kingdom's ancient laws as sacred truth. Among them was Lord Edmund Blackwood, the High Chancellor, whose knowledge of Valdorian legal code was both legendary and feared. "Catherine," Isabella said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "tell me honestly. Do you believe that sometimes protecting someone we love requires us to speak difficult truths?" Lady Catherine's brow furrowed with concern. In all their years of friendship, she had rarely seen the Queen Consort look so troubled. "Your Majesty, wisdom often lies in knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. But, if your conscience weighs heavily, perhaps the burden is meant to be shared." The council chamber fell silent as Isabella entered, the lords rising in unison to bow their heads in respect. King Marcus was traveling to the eastern provinces on a diplomatic mission, leaving Isabella to preside over the weekly gathering. She took her seat at the head of the massive oak table, its surface polished to mirror perfection. "My lords," Isabella began, her voice carrying the authority that 15 years of royal training had instilled in her, "we gather today to address the ongoing matters of state and the welfare of our kingdom." The discussion proceeded normally for the first hour. Reports were given on harvest yields, trade agreements were reviewed, and judicial matters were addressed with the methodical precision that had governed Valdoria for centuries. It was Lord Blackwood who noticed that the Queen Consort seemed distracted, her usual sharp questions replaced by distant nods. "Your Majesty," Lord Blackwood ventured, his grey eyes studying her carefully, "you seem preoccupied today. Is there a matter of particular concern that requires our attention?" Isabella's heart began to race. This was the moment she had been both dreading and anticipating. The secret she had carried for 13 years pressed against her chest like a physical weight. Princess Elena, now 15 and beloved throughout the kingdom, was scheduled to begin her official royal duties next year. Soon, questions about her future marriage and the continuation of the royal line would become paramount. "Actually, Lord Blackwood, there is something that has been troubling me deeply," Isabella said, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her. It concerns the future of our royal succession and, a matter that I fear I have remained silent about for far too long. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The lords exchanged glances, sensing that whatever the queen consort was about to reveal would be significant. Lord Blackwood leaned forward, his extensive knowledge of royal protocol triggering alarm bells in his mind. "Your Majesty, perhaps such delicate matters might be better discussed in a more private setting," suggested Lord William Hartwell, the youngest member of the council and a close family friend. Isabella shook her head firmly. "No, Lord Hartwell. If I am to speak this truth, it must be spoken before witnesses who can attest to my words. What I am about to say concerns not just our family, but the very legitimacy of our royal line." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the servants who typically moved quietly about the chamber stopped their activities, sensing the gravity of the moment. Lord Blackwood's face had gone pale, and his hands gripped the edge of the table. "Continue, Your Majesty," he said slowly, though every instinct told him to stop this conversation before it could proceed further. Isabella took a deep breath, knowing that once these words left her lips, there would be no taking them back. "Princess Elena," she began, her voice breaking slightly, "is not King Marcus's biological daughter." The words hung in the air like a curse, their weight settling over the room with devastating finality. Several lords gasped audibly, while others sat in stunned silence. Lord Blackwood's face had gone from pale to ashen, and his mind immediately began racing through the implications of what the Queen Consort had just confessed. "Your Majesty," Lord Blackwood said carefully, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining composure, "are you absolutely certain of what you are saying? The implications of such a statement are beyond measure." Isabella nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I am certain, Lord Blackwood. During the early months of my marriage to King Marcus, I was lonely and frightened. The king was often away on military campaigns, and I found comfort in the company of Sir Gabriel Thornfield, a knight of the Royal Guard. Our relationship lasted only a few months, but Princess Elena is the result of that union." Lord Hartwell stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone floor. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, perhaps we should adjourn this meeting and continue this discussion when His Majesty the King returns." But Lord Blackwood raised a hand to silence him, his legal mind already working through the catastrophic ramifications of Isabella's confession. "I'm afraid, Lord Hartwell, that according to the ancient laws of Valdoria, this matter cannot simply be postponed or discussed privately." Isabella felt her blood turn to ice. "What do you mean, Lord Blackwood?" The High Chancellor stood slowly, his movements deliberate and grave. He walked to an ornate bookshelf and retrieved a leather-bound volume that looked as old as the kingdom itself. "Your Majesty, I refer to the Codex Regulus, specifically Section 7, Article 23, which addresses matters of royal succession and legitimacy." He opened the ancient book carefully, its pages yellowed with age but its words still clear and binding. It states clearly that any false claim to royal lineage, whether through deception or mistaken identity, constitutes an act of high treason against the crown. Furthermore, any person who knowingly allows such deception to continue, regardless of their intent, is guilty of conspiracy against the royal bloodline. Isabella felt the room begin to spin around her. "But, I'm confessing the truth now. Surely that must count for something." Lord Blackwood's expression was grave as he continued reading. "The law makes no distinction for confession after the fact, Your Majesty. In fact, it specifically states that anyone who has allowed false royal lineage to be established and maintained is subject to the full penalty of treason, which according to this text, is imprisonment for no less than 100 years. The number hit Isabella like a physical blow. 100 years. It might as well have been a death sentence. She was 38 years old, such a sentence would end her life behind bars. "But, surely," interjected Lord Hartwell desperately, "these are ancient laws that have no bearing on modern jurisprudence." Lord Blackwood shook his head solemnly. "I'm afraid not, Lord Hartwell. The Codex Regulus was specifically incorporated into our current legal system during the constitutional reforms of 1823. These laws are not only still valid, they are considered the supreme law of the land in matters concerning the royal family. Isabella sank back into her chair, the full weight of her situation crashing down upon her. She had thought that confessing the truth would somehow set her free, that honesty would provide a path forward. Instead, she had just confessed to a crime that would result in her spending the rest of her life in prison. There must be something, she whispered. Some provision for mercy, some way to address this situation without destroying everything. Lord Blackwood continued examining the ancient text, his finger tracing along lines of archaic legal language. The law does provide for one possibility, he said finally. If the confession is made voluntarily and, with the intent to protect the kingdom from future deception, and, if the confessor can provide proof of their claims, then, the matter may be brought before the High Court of Succession for judgment. What does that mean? Isabella asked, grasping at this slim thread of hope. It means, Your Majesty, that you would be subject to formal charges and trial. During this process, every aspect of your claim would be investigated thoroughly. If your confession is proven true, you would face the full penalty of the law. However, if there are mitigating circumstances, or if the court determines that your actions were motivated by love rather than malice, there might be some possibility of reduced sentencing. Isabella felt trapped between two impossible choices. Remain silent and live with the devastating secret that Princess Elena was not the rightful heir, or face a legal system that seemed designed to destroy her for telling the truth. How long would I have before formal charges are brought? She asked quietly. Lord Blackwood consulted the text again. According to protocol, formal charges must be filed within 7 days of the confession being made before witnesses. Given that this council serves as those witnesses, the process has already begun. As if summoned by the gravity of the situation, a messenger entered the chamber bearing news that would complicate everything further. Your Majesty, he announced with a bow, Princess Elena has returned early from her studies abroad and requests an immediate audience with you. Isabella's heart sank further. Her beloved daughter, the sweet girl who had brought such joy to the kingdom, was about to walk into the middle of a constitutional crisis that would change her life forever. Not only was Elena about to learn that her entire identity as a royal heir was built on a lie, but she would also discover that her mother faced the possibility of spending the rest of her life in prison for that deception. Send word to Princess Elena that I will see her in my private chambers within the hour, Isabella said, her voice barely steady. As the lords filed out of the chamber in stunned silence, Isabella remained seated, staring at the ancient book that contained her fate. Lord Blackwood approached her hesitantly. Your Majesty, he said softly, I want you to know that while I am bound by law to follow these proceedings, I take no pleasure in them. You have been a beloved queen consort, and this kingdom has flourished under your guidance. Isabella looked up at him with tears in her eyes. Lord Blackwood, I need you to promise me something. Whatever happens to me, please ensure that Princess Elena is protected. She is innocent in all of this, and she doesn't deserve to suffer for my mistakes. The High Chancellor nodded gravely. I give you my word, Your Majesty. Princess Elena's welfare will be my primary concern throughout these proceedings. As Isabella walked slowly back to her chambers, the weight of her confession settled over her like a shroud. She had 15 years of memories with Elena, 15 years of watching her daughter grow into a compassionate, intelligent young woman who was beloved by everyone who met her. Now she would have to tell Elena not only that her father was not the king, but that her mother might be taken away from her forever. The irony was not lost on Isabella. She had confessed the truth in an attempt to protect Elena from living a lie, but, in doing so, she had potentially destroyed both of their lives. The ancient laws of Valdoria, designed to protect the integrity of the royal bloodline, had become a trap that threatened to consume everything she held dear. As she reached her chambers, Isabella could hear Elena's familiar laughter echoing from the sitting room. Soon, that laughter would be replaced by tears, and the comfortable world they had built together would crumble into uncertainty and fear. The crown that had once symbolized honor and duty now felt like a burden too heavy to bear, and Isabella wondered if love and truth were truly worth the price they demanded. The sun had set over Montclair Palace, and, with it, the last day of innocence for the Valdorian royal family had come to an end. Princess Elena Montclair stood before the tall windows of her mother's sitting room, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the palace gardens in shades of gold and amber. At 15, she possessed the graceful bearing that came naturally to those born to royalty, but there was something more in her manner, a warmth and genuine compassion that had endeared her to everyone from the palace staff to the common people of Valdoria. She had returned from her studies at the prestigious Thornwick Academy earlier than expected, eager to share exciting news about her academic achievements and the innovative ideas she had developed for improving education throughout the kingdom. Elena had always been passionate about helping others, and her time abroad had only strengthened her desire to make a meaningful difference as a future ruler. Mother should have been here by now, Elena murmured to herself, glancing at the ornate clock on the mantelpiece. She had requested this meeting hours ago, but each passing minute filled her with growing concern. Something felt wrong in the palace today, the servants seemed unusually subdued, and even Lady Catherine had appeared distracted when Elena had greeted her upon arrival. The heavy oak door opened slowly, and Queen Consort Isabella entered the room. Elena immediately noticed that her mother's usually perfect composure seemed strained, her eyes showing signs of tears that had been carefully wiped away but not entirely concealed. "Mother," Elena said warmly, rushing to embrace Isabella. "I've missed you so much. I have wonderful news to share about my studies, and I've developed some ideas that I think could really help our people." Isabella held her daughter tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of Elena's hair and trying to memorize this moment of innocent joy. She knew that within minutes, Elena's world would be forever changed, and the guilt of what she was about to do threatened to overwhelm her. "My darling Elena," Isabella said softly, "please, sit with me. There are things I need to tell you that cannot wait any longer." Elena settled onto the silk-upholstered sofa beside her mother, her expression shifting to one of concern as she noticed Isabella's obvious distress. "Mother, what's wrong? You look as though you've been crying." Isabella took Elena's hands in her own, studying her daughter's face with a mixture of love and devastating sorrow. Elena had always resembled Isabella more than King Marcus, with her deep brown eyes and delicate features, but now Isabella found herself searching for traces of Sir Gabriel Thornfield in her daughter's appearance. "Elena, what I'm about to tell you will change everything you believe about yourself and our family," Isabella began, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain strong. "I need you to know that no matter what you learn today, my love for you has never wavered, not for a single moment." Elena felt a chill of fear run through her. In all her 15 years, she had never seen her mother look so devastated. "Mother, you're frightening me. Please, just tell me what's happened." Isabella closed her eyes briefly, gathering the courage that had already cost her so dearly earlier that day. "Today, I confessed something to the Council of Lords that I have kept secret since before you were born. Elena, King Marcus is not your biological father." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She stared at Isabella in complete shock, unable to process what she had just heard. "What do you mean? Of course father is my father. I don't understand what you're saying." Isabella's tears began to flow freely now, her careful composure crumbling as she watched her daughter's world collapse. "During the early months of my marriage to the king, I was very young and often alone while he was away on military campaigns. I found comfort with someone else, a knight named Sir Gabriel Thornfield. You are his daughter, not the king's." Elena pulled her hands away from Isabella's grasp, standing abruptly and backing away as if distance could somehow change what she had just heard. "No," she whispered, shaking her head violently. "No, that can't be true. You're mistaken. You must be mistaken. I wish I were, my darling, but I'm not. I've carried this secret for 15 years, and today I realized I could no longer live with the deception. You deserve to know the truth about who you really are." Elena sank into a chair across from her mother, her mind reeling with the implications of this revelation. Everything she had ever believed about herself, her identity, her future role as queen, all of it was built on a lie. "But, I'm the heir to the throne," Elena said desperately. "I've been trained since childhood to rule Valdoria. The people expect me to be their queen someday. How can none of that be real?" Isabella's heart broke as she watched her daughter struggle to understand a truth that destroyed everything familiar and secure in her life. "That's exactly why I had to confess, Elena. I couldn't let you take the throne knowing that you weren't the rightful heir. The people of Valdoria deserve to know that their future ruler comes from the true royal bloodline." "Who else knows about this?" Elena asked, her voice hollow with shock. "Now. The entire Council of Lords. By tomorrow, I suspect the whole kingdom will know." Elena felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. "And, what happens now? What happens to you? What happens to me?" Isabella's voice broke as she delivered the final devastating blow. "According to ancient Valdorian law, what I've done constitutes high treason. I face a potential sentence of 100 years in prison." Elena shot to her feet, her shock transforming into desperate panic. 100 years? But, that's impossible. You told the truth, surely that has to count for something. I'm afraid the law doesn't distinguish between confession and deception after the fact. I knowingly allowed you to be raised as the royal heir when I knew you weren't entitled to that position. Elena began pacing frantically around the room, her mind racing to find some solution to this nightmare. "There has to be something we can do. We can retract your confession. We can say you were mistaken, or confused, or coerced somehow." Isabella shook her head sadly. "Elena, 12 lords heard my confession. It cannot be undone. And, even if it could, would you really want to live your entire life knowing that your claim to the throne was false?" "Yes." Elena cried out without hesitation. "If it means keeping you safe, if it means our family stays together, then, yes. I don't care about the throne. I care about you." Isabella rose and moved toward her daughter, but Elena stepped back, her emotions swinging between grief and anger. "How could you do this to us?" Elena demanded, tears streaming down her face. "How could you keep this secret for so long and, then, destroy everything with one conversation?" The accusation cut Isabella deeply, but she understood her daughter's anger. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I kept the secret, you could live the life you were meant to live as my daughter, regardless of who your father was. But, I'm not meant to live this life." Elena shouted. "That's exactly your point, isn't it? I'm not a princess. I'm not an heir. I'm just the bastard daughter of some knight nobody will remember." Isabella flinched at the harsh language, but, more than that, she was devastated to see her gentle, compassionate daughter reduced to such pain and bitterness. Sir Gabriel Thornfield was not just some knight, Elena. He was a good man, brave and honorable. He died serving this kingdom in battle when you were only 2 years old. He never knew you were his daughter, but, if he had, he would have loved you as much as I do. Elena laughed bitterly through her tears. How convenient that he's dead and can't confirm or deny any of this. The cruelty in Elena's voice was so unlike her usual gentle nature that Isabella realized just how deeply traumatized her daughter was by these revelations. The sweet, optimistic girl who had entered this room an hour ago was gone, replaced by someone hardened by betrayal and loss. "Elena, please, I know you're hurt and confused, but this changes nothing about who you are as a person. You're still kind, intelligent, and compassionate. You still care deeply about helping others. But, I'm not a princess." Elena screamed. "Everything I've ever been taught, every lesson in royal protocol, every preparation for ruling this kingdom, it was all pointless. I've wasted my entire life preparing for a role that was never meant to be mine." Isabella tried once more to approach her daughter, but Elena backed away again, her eyes filled with a pain that cut through Isabella's heart like a blade. "And, now you're going to prison for 100 years, and I'll be left here to face the scandal alone. The entire kingdom will know that their beloved princess is a fraud. Do you have any idea what that will do to me? Do you care at all about how I'll survive this humiliation?" "Of course I care," Isabella said desperately. "Elena, you're the most important thing in my life. Everything I've done, including today's confession, has been motivated by love for you. If you loved me, you would have kept your mouth shut." Elena shouted. "If you loved me, you would have taken this secret to your grave and let me live my life in peace." The words hung between them like a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. Isabella realized that her daughter might never forgive her for this moment, and the possibility was almost more than she could bear. A soft knock at the door interrupted the devastating confrontation. Lady Catherine entered quietly, her face grave with news that would only add to their suffering. "Your Majesty, Princess Elena, I apologize for the interruption, but Lord Blackwood requests an immediate meeting. The formal charges are being prepared tonight rather than waiting the full 7 days." Isabella felt her knees go weak. "Tonight? Why the urgency?" Lady Catherine's voice was barely above a whisper. "Word of your confession has already begun to spread throughout the palace, Your Majesty. Lord Blackwood fears that if formal proceedings aren't initiated immediately, civil unrest could follow. The people's faith in the monarchy is fragile." Elena looked between her mother and Lady Catherine with growing horror. "You mean the whole kingdom is going to know about this tonight?" "I'm afraid so, Your Highness," Lady Catherine replied gently. "Lord Blackwood has also requested that you be present for the formal reading of charges." Elena turned to face her mother with a look of such anguish that Isabella wished she could take back every word she had spoken to the Council of Lords. "So not only do I have to watch you be arrested for treason, but I have to do it in front of the people who have served our family for years. People who trusted us. People who believed in us." Isabella moved toward the door, knowing that delaying the inevitable would only make things worse. "Elena, I know you hate me right now, and I understand why. But, please remember that King Marcus has loved you as his own daughter from the moment you were born. Whatever happens to me, he will continue to care for you." "But, he's not my father," Elena said coldly. "You've made that very clear." As they walked through the palace corridors toward the council chamber, Elena was struck by how different everything looked now. The portraits of royal ancestors no longer represented her heritage. The crown jewels that she had been taught to respect were no longer part of her legacy. Even the servants who bowed respectfully as they passed seemed like strangers now, people who had unknowingly served a lie for 15 years. Lord Blackwood was waiting for them in the council chamber, along with the other lords and several court officials. The formal atmosphere was heavy with the weight of legal proceedings that would determine Isabella's fate. "Your Majesty, Princess Elena," Lord Blackwood began solemnly, "we are gathered here tonight to formally address the matter of succession fraud and high treason as confessed by Queen Consort Isabella Montclair earlier today." Elena watched in numb horror as the charges were read aloud, each word driving home the reality that her mother faced a lifetime in prison for telling a truth that Elena now wished had never been spoken. As the evening progressed, Elena began to understand that this was only the beginning of their ordeal. There would be investigations, trials, and endless public scrutiny. Her own future was now completely uncertain. She was no longer a princess, but she wasn't exactly a commoner either. She existed in some strange liminal space that nobody quite knew how to navigate. When the formal proceedings concluded for the evening, Elena found herself alone with Isabella for what might be the last time for years to come. "Mother," Elena said quietly, her anger temporarily replaced by exhaustion, "what am I supposed to do now? Who am I supposed to be?" Isabella pulled her daughter close, grateful that Elena was no longer pushing her away. "You're supposed to be exactly who you've always been, a young woman with a kind heart and brilliant mind who wants to make the world better for others. Royal blood doesn't define your worth, Elena. Your character does." But, even as Isabella spoke these comforting words, she knew that Elena's path forward would be impossibly difficult. The girl had been raised for one specific purpose, and that purpose had just been stripped away from her in the cruelest possible manner. As mother and daughter held each other in the gathering darkness, both wondered if love and truth had truly been worth the price they were about to pay. King Marcus Montclair received the urgent message while inspecting the eastern border fortifications, far from the political storm that was consuming his kingdom's capital. The messenger had ridden for 2 days straight, changing horses at royal waypoints, to deliver news that would shake the very foundations of the monarchy he had spent 20 years building and protecting. The parchment trembled in his weathered hands as he read the impossible words. His wife had confessed to high treason, his beloved daughter was not his biological child, and the royal succession that he had taken for granted was now in complete chaos. For several long moments, Marcus simply stared at the letter, his mind refusing to process the magnitude of what Isabella had done. "Your Majesty," ventured General Harrison, his longtime military advisor and trusted friend, "the men are asking if we should prepare for an immediate return to the capital." Marcus looked up from the letter with the hollow expression of a man whose entire world had just crumbled. "Prepare the fastest horses, Harrison. We ride within the hour." His voice was steady, but General Harrison had known the king long enough to recognize the tremor of barely controlled emotion beneath the surface. As the royal party raced through the countryside toward Montclair Palace, Marcus found himself replaying every moment of his marriage to Isabella, searching for signs he might have missed. Had there been clues about Elena's true parentage? Had Isabella's early nervousness as a new bride been more than simple adjustment to royal life? More troubling still was the realization that his feelings about the situation were completely contradictory. He was devastated by Isabella's betrayal, furious at being deceived for 15 years, and terrified about the constitutional crisis this revelation would create. Yet underneath all of that, his love for Elena remained completely unchanged. The girl who had called him father, who had brought such joy to his life, was still the same person regardless of whose blood ran through her veins. The ride back to the capital gave Marcus time to consider the legal and political ramifications of Isabella's confession. As king, he was sworn to uphold the laws of Valdoria, even when those laws demanded justice against his own family. The ancient codes that governed royal succession were not suggestions, they were sacred obligations that had maintained the kingdom's stability for centuries. Yet as a husband and father, the thought of seeing Isabella imprisoned for life was almost unbearable. Whatever mistakes she had made, whatever deceptions she had maintained, Marcus knew that her love for Elena had been genuine and her service to the kingdom had been exemplary. The woman facing a 100-year sentence was the same woman who had stood by his side through political crises, natural disasters, and the countless challenges of royal life. News of the confession had spread throughout Valdoria with the speed that only royal scandals could achieve. By the time Marcus reached the palace gates, crowds had gathered in the square, their faces showing confusion, anger, and fear about what this revelation meant for their kingdom's future. Some called for Isabella's immediate imprisonment, while others demanded answers about how such a massive deception could have been maintained for so long. Lord Blackwood met King Marcus at the palace entrance, his expression grave with the weight of constitutional duty. "Your Majesty, I regret that your return is under such dire circumstances. I'm afraid the situation has become quite complex in your absence." Marcus dismounted his horse with grim determination. "Lord Blackwood, I need a full briefing on everything that has transpired, and I need it immediately. Where are my wife and daughter now? Queen Consort Isabella is confined to her chambers under guard, per ancient protocol for those accused of crimes against the crown. Princess Elena has refused to leave her mother's side and has been granted permission to remain with her for now." As they walked through the palace corridors, Lord Blackwood explained the legal proceedings that had been initiated, the formal charges that had been filed, and the timeline for the trial that would determine Isabella's fate. Marcus listened with the focused attention of a ruler, but his heart was breaking with every detail. "Lord Blackwood, in your expert opinion, is there any possibility of mercy under these circumstances?" The High Chancellor paused before answering, choosing his words carefully. Your Majesty, the law is quite clear about the penalties for succession fraud. However, there are precedents for royal pardons in cases where the confession was voluntary and the intent was to protect the kingdom rather than harm it. But Marcus prompted, sensing there was more to the situation. But any royal pardon in this case would require you to officially acknowledge that Princess Elena is not your biological daughter and, therefore not the rightful heir to the throne. You would essentially be choosing between saving your wife and preserving your daughter's claim to succession. Marcus felt the full weight of an impossible choice settling on his shoulders. Save Isabella and destroy Elena's future, or protect Elena's position and watch the woman he loved spend the rest of her life in prison. They reached Isabella's chambers, where 2 guards stood at attention outside the door. Inside, Marcus found his wife and daughter sitting together on the window seat, both showing the devastating effects of the past few days. Isabella looked older somehow, as if the weight of her confession had physically aged her. Elena appeared lost and fragile, nothing like the confident young woman he had bid farewell to just weeks earlier. "Marcus," Isabella said softly, rising to meet him. For a moment, husband and wife simply looked at each other across a chasm of hurt and uncertainty. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. "All of it?" Isabella nodded, tears beginning to flow again. "Every word." "I'm so sorry, Marcus. I never meant for things to go this far. I thought I could carry the secret forever." Elena watched this exchange between her parents with growing anguish. Even now, learning the truth about her parentage, she could see the genuine love between Marcus and Isabella. The family she had known and treasured was disintegrating before her eyes, and there seemed to be nothing anyone could do to stop it. "Why now?" Marcus asked. "What changed after all these years?" Isabella struggled to find words that would make sense of her decision. "Elena is about to begin her official royal duties. Soon there would be talk of marriage, of producing heirs to continue the royal line. I couldn't let her build her entire life on a foundation of lies." Marcus turned to Elena, his heart aching at the confusion and pain in her eyes. "And, how are you managing all of this, my dear?" Elena's composure finally cracked completely. "I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I'm supposed to do or where I belong. Everyone keeps telling me that I'm still the same person, but how can that be true when everything I believed about myself was wrong?" Marcus moved to embrace Elena, and she collapsed against him with sobs that came from the deepest part of her soul. "You are my daughter," he said firmly. "Royal blood or not, you are my daughter in every way that matters. That will never change." "But, legally, she's not," Isabella said quietly. "And, according to Valdorian law, that makes all the difference." The royal family's private anguish was interrupted by Lord Blackwood's return. "Your Majesty, I'm afraid there are urgent matters that require your immediate attention. The kingdom needs to understand how this situation will be resolved, and there are questions about the succession that cannot remain unanswered much longer." Marcus realized that his personal grief would have to wait. As king, he had obligations that superseded his role as husband and father. The stability of the entire kingdom depended on how he handled this crisis. "Lord Blackwood, what are our options for managing the succession crisis?" "Theoretically, Your Majesty, you could remarry and father a legitimate heir. Alternatively, the crown could pass to your brother Prince William's line, as specified in the succession laws." Elena felt a new wave of devastation wash over her. Not only was she losing her identity as a princess, but she was being replaced entirely. Uncle William's son, Prince Theodore, was only 12 years old, but he would now be groomed for the throne that Elena had spent her entire life preparing to inherit. "There is one other possibility," Lord Blackwood continued reluctantly. "The law does provide for legitimization in extraordinary circumstances. If Your Majesty were to formally adopt Princess Elena and declare her your legal heir, regardless of biological parentage, it might satisfy the succession requirements." Isabella looked up with the first spark of hope she had felt since making her confession. Would that really be possible? It would require approval from the High Court of Succession and the Council of Lords, Lord Blackwood explained. And it would only be possible if Queen Consort Isabella were no longer in a position to contest the adoption. The implication was clear: Elena could potentially be saved, but only if Isabella was imprisoned or worse. Once again, the family faced an impossible choice between protecting one member while sacrificing another. Over the following days, as the trial proceedings began in earnest, the entire kingdom watched the royal family's private tragedy play out in public. Witnesses were called to testify about Isabella's behavior during the early years of her marriage. Sir Gabriel Thornfield's military records were examined for any evidence that might corroborate or contradict Isabella's claims. Elena found herself caught between loyalty to her mother and the practical necessity of securing her own future. Part of her wanted to publicly denounce Isabella's confession as false, but she knew that such a deception would only make things worse for everyone involved. Instead, she threw herself into researching legal precedents and constitutional law, desperately searching for some loophole that might save both her mother and herself. The most heartbreaking aspect of the entire ordeal was watching Marcus struggle with his divided loyalties. As Elena's legal father, he wanted to protect her claim to the throne. As Isabella's husband, he wanted to find some way to save her from a lifetime in prison. As king, he was obligated to uphold the law regardless of his personal feelings. Public opinion was sharply divided. Some citizens felt betrayed by the deception and demanded that justice be served according to ancient law. Others argued that Isabella's confession showed courage and should be met with mercy rather than punishment. Still others worried about the kingdom's stability if the succession crisis wasn't resolved quickly and decisively. International observers watched the proceedings with keen interest, recognizing that Valdoria's handling of this constitutional crisis could set precedents that affected monarchy throughout the region. Neighboring kingdoms began to reconsider their own marriage alliances and succession agreements, wondering what other royal secrets might be hidden behind palace walls. Elena's education took on new urgency as she studied not just royal protocol but also alternative paths her life might take. If she lost her claim to the throne, she would need other skills and interests to build a meaningful existence. The girl who had once been destined to rule an entire kingdom now faced the possibility of becoming a private citizen with no clear role or purpose. Isabella spent her confined days writing letters, to Elena, to Marcus, to the people of Valdoria who had trusted and supported her for 15 years. She wanted to explain her actions, to apologize for the deception, and to ensure that whatever happened to her, Elena would be protected and loved. Each letter was a small attempt to repair damage that seemed irreparable. The trial itself became a media spectacle that consumed the kingdom's attention for weeks. Legal experts debated the application of ancient laws to modern circumstances. Historians examined similar cases from Valdoria's past. Political analysts speculated about the long-term implications for the monarchy's survival. Through it all, the royal family struggled to maintain some semblance of normal relationships while navigating an extraordinary crisis. Marcus continued to serve as king while watching his wife face prosecution for treason. Isabella accepted her confinement with dignity while agonizing over the pain she had caused her family. Elena tried to support her mother while preparing for a future that remained completely uncertain. As the evidence mounted and legal arguments were presented, it became increasingly clear that Isabella's confession was truthful and that the ancient laws of Valdoria would be enforced regardless of the personal cost. The kingdom that had seemed so stable and predictable just weeks earlier was now facing its greatest constitutional crisis in centuries. The weight of centuries-old laws pressed down on a modern family whose only crime had been trying to build a life together despite the circumstances of Elena's birth. Love, duty, truth, and justice had become opposing forces in a struggle that would determine not just the fate of individuals, but the future of the Valdorian monarchy itself. The High Court of Succession convened in the ancient Hall of Justice, its vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows bearing witness to centuries of legal proceedings that had shaped the kingdom's destiny. 7 judges, each representing a different region of Valdoria and, appointed for life to ensure their independence, would determine Isabella's fate and, by extension, the future of the royal family. Chief Justice Margaret Aldrich, a formidable woman in her 70s who had served on the court for over 30 years, called the proceedings to order with the gravity that such momentous cases demanded. The hall was packed with nobles, foreign dignitaries, members of parliament, and, carefully selected representatives of the common people. Never in living memory had a case so directly challenged the fundamental principles of royal succession. "We are gathered here," Chief Justice Aldrich announced, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, to determine the guilt or innocence of Queen Consort Isabella Montclair in the matter of succession fraud and high treason, as defined by the ancient laws of this kingdom. Isabella sat in the defendant's chair wearing a simple black dress, her usual jewelry and royal regalia replaced by the plain attire of someone facing judgment. Despite the weight of the charges against her, she maintained a dignified composure that impressed even her harshest critics. Beside her, the kingdom's most skilled defense attorney, Lord James Morrison, prepared to argue what many considered an impossible case. Elena watched from the gallery reserved for royal family members, her hands clenched tightly in her lap as she prepared to see her mother prosecuted for a crime that had been motivated by love. King Marcus sat beside her, his face a mask of royal composure that concealed the turmoil beneath. The sight of his wife in the defendant's chair was almost more than he could bear. The prosecution was led by Attorney General Sarah Whitmore, a brilliant legal mind who had never lost a case involving crimes against the crown. Her opening statement was methodical and devastating in its clarity. "Your Honors," she began, addressing the 7 judges, "the defendant has confessed to perpetrating a deception that strikes at the very heart of our constitutional monarchy. For 15 years, she allowed Princess Elena to be raised as the rightful heir to the throne, knowing full well that the princess had no legitimate claim to that position." Attorney General Whitmore outlined the charges with precision: succession fraud, conspiracy against the royal bloodline, and high treason. Each charge carried severe penalties under Valdorian law, and the evidence was overwhelming thanks to Isabella's voluntary confession. "The ancient laws that govern our kingdom exist for a sacred purpose," she continued. "They ensure that only those with rightful claims can inherit the crown, maintaining the legitimacy that has preserved our monarchy for over 800 years. The defendant's actions, regardless of her motivation, represent a fundamental violation of these principles." When Lord Morrison rose to present Isabella's defense, he faced the nearly impossible task of arguing against both the law and his client's own confession. His strategy was to focus not on denying the charges, but on the circumstances that had led to Isabella's actions and the voluntary nature of her confession. "Your Honors," he said, his voice carrying conviction despite the odds against him, "Queen Consort Isabella stands before you not as a traitor seeking to undermine the crown, but as a woman whose love for her daughter led her to make choices that she herself ultimately recognized as wrong." Lord Morrison painted a picture of a young bride, barely out of her teens, struggling with loneliness and fear in an arranged marriage to a man she barely knew. He emphasized that Isabella's relationship with Sir Gabriel Thornfield had been brief and had ended long before she understood its consequences. Most importantly, he argued that her eventual confession demonstrated a commitment to truth that actually served the kingdom's interests. The defendant could have carried this secret to her grave, he argued. Princess Elena could have ascended to the throne, and no one would have been the wiser. Instead, Queen Consort Isabella chose truth over comfort, justice over personal safety. That choice, while legally problematic, shows a character that deserves consideration for mercy. The testimony that followed painted a complex picture of Isabella's 15 years as Queen Consort. Witnesses spoke of her dedication to charitable causes, her wise counsel to the king, and her genuine love for the people of Valdoria. Palace staff testified to her kindness and accessibility, noting that she had never treated servants as beneath her notice. Elena herself was called to testify, a moment that she had been dreading for weeks. Standing in the witness box, facing the 7 judges who would determine her mother's fate, she struggled to find words that might somehow save Isabella without destroying what remained of her own future. Your Honors, Elena said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall, my mother made a mistake when she was young and frightened. But, every day since then, she has worked to be the best queen consort she could be. She taught me to care about others, to think of the kingdom's welfare before my own comfort. Everything I know about leadership and compassion, I learned from her. Elena's testimony was heartbreaking in its simple honesty. She spoke of a mother who had sat up with her through childhood illnesses, who had patiently explained the complexities of statecraft, who had always encouraged her to be kind and just in all her dealings. If my mother is guilty of loving me too much to burden me with a painful truth, Elena concluded, then, I would rather share that guilt than see her punished alone. The prosecution's cross-examination of Elena was gentle but relentless. Attorney General Whitmore established that Elena had indeed been raised with the expectation of inheriting the throne, that she had received education and training specifically designed for a future monarch, and that her entire identity had been built around a false assumption of royal heritage. Princess Elena, Attorney General Whitmore asked carefully, do you understand that by allowing you to be raised as the heir apparent, your mother prevented the rightful heir from receiving the preparation necessary for rule? Elena felt the question like a physical blow. She had never considered that her false claim to the throne had potentially harmed someone else, Prince Theodore, her cousin, who should have been receiving the education and training she had been given instead. I hadn't thought of it that way, Elena admitted quietly. And, do you understand that your mother's deception, however well-intentioned, has created a constitutional crisis that threatens the stability of our kingdom? Again, Elena was forced to acknowledge a truth that she had been avoiding. Her mother's confession hadn't just affected their family, it had shaken the foundation of the entire political system. The most damaging testimony came from the kingdom's constitutional scholars, who explained in detail how succession fraud had historically been treated as one of the most serious crimes possible under Valdorian law. They cited precedents dating back centuries, cases where similar deceptions had resulted in severe punishments designed to preserve the integrity of the royal bloodline. Professor Edmund Hartwell of the Royal University presented historical evidence showing that the 100-year sentence specified in the ancient codes was not merely symbolic but had actually been enforced in previous cases. He explained the reasoning behind such harsh penalties. The monarchy's legitimacy depended entirely on public confidence in the succession system, and any compromise of that confidence threatened the kingdom's stability. Your Honors, Professor Hartwell testified, the law recognizes no distinction between deception and confession after the fact. The damage to the constitutional order is the same regardless of how the fraud comes to light. Isabella's own testimony was perhaps the most compelling moment of the entire trial. When she took the stand in her own defense, she spoke with a quiet dignity that impressed even her strongest critics. Your Honors, she said, I do not ask for mercy because I believe my actions were right. They were not. I ask for mercy because I believe my confession demonstrates a commitment to truth that should count for something under our system of justice. She explained her decision to confess in terms that went beyond personal guilt. Princess Elena was about to begin her official royal duties. Within a few years, she would be expected to marry and produce heirs to continue the royal line. I could not allow her to build her entire life on a foundation that I knew to be false. Isabella's testimony revealed the crushing weight of the secret she had carried for 15 years. Attorney General Whitmore established that Isabella had understood the implications of her deception throughout Elena's childhood, that she had multiple opportunities to confess earlier, and that she had actively participated in preparing Elena for royal duties despite knowing the preparation was based on false premises. Queen Consort Isabella, the Attorney General asked, did you ever consider the possibility that your confession might cause more harm than your continued silence? Isabella paused before answering. Every day, Your Honor. But, I ultimately concluded that a kingdom built on lies, however comfortable those lies might be, could not survive indefinitely. Expert witnesses testified about the potential ramifications of the case for the monarchy's future. Political scientists explained how royal legitimacy functioned in modern democratic societies, arguing that public confidence was the monarchy's most valuable asset. Foreign policy experts discussed how the crisis might affect Valdoria's international relationships and treaty obligations. Perhaps most troubling was testimony from public opinion researchers who had been tracking the kingdom's response to the scandal. Their data showed that the population was deeply divided not just about Isabella's fate, but about the monarchy itself. Some citizens questioned whether an institution that could be so easily deceived deserved to continue existing. As the trial progressed, Elena found herself grappling with increasingly complex emotions. Part of her remained furious with Isabella for creating this situation. Another part admired her mother's courage in choosing truth over comfort. Most troubling of all, she was beginning to understand that there might not be any truly right answers to the dilemmas her family faced. The testimony phase concluded with a surprise witness, Sir Gabriel Thornfield's younger brother, Captain David Thornfield, who had served in the Royal Guard for over 20 years. His testimony provided the final piece of evidence that no one had expected. "Your Honours," Captain Thornfield said, his voice heavy with emotion, "my brother Gabriel left behind letters that were given to me after his death in battle. One of those letters, written just before his final campaign, speaks of his deep regret about a brief relationship with a young woman who was married to another. He never named her, but he expressed hope that any consequences of that relationship would not cause suffering to innocent parties." The letter, authenticated by handwriting experts, showed that Sir Gabriel had suspected he might be Elena's father but had chosen to remain silent to protect both Isabella and the child. His words seemed to echo across the years: "Some truths are too dangerous to speak, but too important to forget entirely." As the trial moved toward its conclusion, the weight of 8 centuries of legal precedent pressed down on the proceedings like a physical force. The ancient laws were clear, the evidence was overwhelming, and the constitutional principles at stake were fundamental to the kingdom's existence. Yet in the defendant's chair sat a woman who had served her kingdom faithfully for 15 years, whose only crime had been loving her daughter enough to tell a painful truth. The contradiction between legal justice and human compassion had never been more starkly illustrated. Chief Justice Aldrich announced that the court would recess for deliberation, and the 7 judges retired to consider a verdict that would determine not just Isabella's fate, but the future direction of the Valdorian monarchy. In the gallery, Elena reached for her father's hand, and together they prepared to learn whether love, truth, and good intentions could overcome the harsh demands of ancient law. The 7 judges of the High Court of Succession deliberated for 3 days behind closed doors, their discussions unknown to the anxious kingdom waiting for a verdict that would reshape the monarchy forever. During those 72 hours, Valdoria seemed suspended in time, with citizens gathering in public squares, nobles hosting private meetings, and international observers speculating about the implications of various possible outcomes. Elena spent those days in a state of emotional exhaustion, alternating between hope and despair as she considered what each potential verdict might mean. If her mother was convicted and sentenced to the full 100-year term, Elena would effectively become an orphan despite having 2 living parents. If Isabella somehow received mercy, the precedent might undermine the very legal system that had maintained the kingdom's stability for centuries. King Marcus struggled with his own impossible position throughout the deliberation period. As the supreme executive authority in Valdoria, he possessed the theoretical power to pardon Isabella regardless of the court's verdict. However, exercising that power would require him to openly defy the judicial system and potentially trigger a constitutional crisis that could destroy the monarchy entirely. On the morning of the 4th day, Chief Justice Aldrich returned to the Hall of Justice with her fellow judges to deliver their verdict. The tension in the packed chamber was palpable as nobles, commoners, and foreign dignitaries waited to learn the fate of Queen Consort Isabella and, by extension, the future of the royal succession. After careful consideration of the evidence, the testimony, and the applicable law, Chief Justice Aldrich began, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority. "This court finds Queen Consort Isabella Montclair guilty of succession fraud and conspiracy against the royal bloodline." Elena felt the world tilt around her as the guilty verdict was pronounced. In the defendant's chair, Isabella closed her eyes briefly but maintained her composure, having prepared herself for this outcome. However, Chief Justice Aldrich continued, and the single word sent a ripple of anticipation through the chamber. This court also finds that the defendant's voluntary confession, her exemplary service to the kingdom, and the genuine remorse she has demonstrated constitute extraordinary mitigating circumstances that warrant consideration. The Chief Justice paused, allowing the implications to settle before delivering the sentence that would determine Isabella's fate. Therefore, this court sentences Queen Consort Isabella Montclair to 25 years imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 15 years, provided she continues to demonstrate the character and commitment to truth that motivated her confession. The sentence hit the chamber like a thunderbolt. 25 years was still devastating. Isabella would be in her 60s before she could hope for release, but it was far less than the 100-year sentence that ancient law prescribed. The judges had found a way to uphold legal principles while acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances of the case. Isabella's knees nearly buckled as the sentence was read. 25 years would take away the remainder of Elena's youth, her potential grandchildren's early years, and any hope of growing old with Marcus. Yet she also recognized that the judges had shown her mercy that few legal experts had believed possible. Elena felt a complex mixture of relief and devastation. Her mother would survive the sentence, but Elena herself would be nearly 40 before Isabella could hope to be released. The family that had once seemed so stable and loving was being torn apart by forces beyond their control. Chief Justice Aldrich was not finished, however. The succession crisis remained unresolved, and the court had one more crucial ruling to deliver. Regarding the matter of royal succession, she announced, this court finds that Princess Elena, despite her biological parentage, has been raised as a member of the royal family in good faith and has demonstrated the character and capabilities necessary for royal service. Elena looked up in surprise, hardly daring to hope that the judges might have found a path forward for her as well. However, the Chief Justice continued, the constitutional requirements for succession cannot be waived merely due to circumstances beyond the individual's control. Therefore, this court recommends that His Majesty King Marcus consider formal adoption proceedings that would legally establish Princess Elena as his heir, with all rights and responsibilities thereto. The recommendation was brilliant in its simplicity. By formally adopting Elena, Marcus could preserve the succession while acknowledging the truth about her biological parentage. The legal fiction would satisfy constitutional requirements while recognizing the reality of their 15-year father-daughter relationship. But, the adoption recommendation came with a significant condition that sent another shock through the chamber. Such adoption proceedings, Chief Justice Aldrich explained, would require the formal renunciation of any legal ties between Princess Elena and Queen Consort Isabella. In effect, Princess Elena would have to choose between her royal future and her relationship with her biological mother. Elena felt the blood drain from her face as she understood the full implications of the court's recommendation. She could potentially save her claim to the throne, but only by legally disowning the mother who had sacrificed everything to tell her the truth. Isabella turned in her chair to look at Elena with eyes full of love and determination. Without speaking, she nodded slightly, encouraging her daughter to accept the adoption and secure her future, regardless of the personal cost to their relationship. The proceedings concluded with Chief Justice Aldrich announcing a 30-day period for the royal family to consider their options before any final decisions about adoption or succession would be required. Isabella would be transferred to Thornwick Prison, a facility reserved for political prisoners, where she would begin serving her sentence immediately. As guards approached to escort Isabella from the chamber, she was granted a few moments to speak with her family. Elena rushed to embrace her mother, tears streaming down both their faces as they said goodbye with the knowledge that their next meeting might be months or even years away. "Take the adoption," Isabella whispered urgently in Elena's ear. "Don't let my mistakes destroy your future. You were born to serve this kingdom, and that calling doesn't change because of who your father was." King Marcus approached them, his own emotions barely under control as he prepared to lose his wife to the prison system. "Isabella," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I will ensure Elena is cared for, and I will visit you as often as the law allows." Isabella looked up at the man she had deceived for 15 years, seeing forgiveness in his eyes despite everything she had put him through. "Thank you, Marcus. For everything. Please help Elena understand that this was the only way forward." As Isabella was led away in chains, Elena felt as though her heart was being physically torn from her chest. The mother who had raised her, taught her, and loved her was disappearing behind prison walls, and there was nothing Elena could do to stop it. The aftermath of the trial created a period of intense political and personal upheaval throughout Valdoria. Public opinion remained sharply divided about the verdict, with some citizens believing Isabella had been treated too leniently while others argued that any imprisonment was excessive for a mother protecting her child. Elena spent the following weeks in deep contemplation about the adoption offer. Lord Blackwood explained the legal implications in detail. Formal adoption would make her Marcus's legitimate heir, but it would also require her to legally sever all ties with Isabella. She would be forbidden from visiting her mother in prison, corresponding with her, or even acknowledging their biological relationship in public. "It's not just a legal formality," Lord Blackwood explained gently. "The adoption would require you to essentially pretend that Queen Consort Isabella was never your mother. The constitutional monarchy demands complete clarity in the line of succession." Elena struggled with the horrible choice between her royal duty and her personal loyalty. Marcus, for his part, made it clear that he would love and support Elena regardless of her decision, but he also emphasized that accepting the adoption was probably her only chance to maintain any connection to the royal family. "Elena," he said during one of their many conversations about the situation, "I have loved you as my daughter since the day you were born. Making that legal wouldn't change my feelings, it would only formalize what has always been true in my heart." The decision became even more complex when Elena received a smuggled letter from Isabella in prison. Her mother's words were both heartbreaking and clear: accept the adoption and secure her future as Valdoria's rightful queen. "My darling Elena," the letter read, "you have a gift for leadership and compassion that this kingdom desperately needs. Don't let the circumstances of your birth prevent you from serving the people who need you. If loving you means losing you, then I accept that loss willingly." After weeks of agonizing deliberation, Elena made her choice. Standing before the same High Court of Succession that had sentenced her mother, she formally requested that King Marcus be granted permission to adopt her as his legal heir. "Your honors," she said, her voice steady despite her breaking heart, "I understand that accepting this adoption means renouncing any legal relationship with Queen Consort Isabella. I do so not out of rejection or anger, but out of recognition that my duty to this kingdom must supersede my personal feelings." The adoption was approved unanimously, and Elena officially became Princess Elena Montclair, heir apparent to the throne of Valdoria. The constitutional crisis was resolved, the succession was secured, and the kingdom could move forward with confidence in its political stability. But the personal cost was devastating. Elena was legally forbidden from having any contact with Isabella, and she struggled daily with the guilt of abandoning the woman who had sacrificed everything for her. She threw herself into her royal duties with unprecedented dedication, working tirelessly to prove herself worthy of the crown that had come at such a terrible price. King Marcus remarried within 2 years, partly for political reasons and partly out of loneliness, but he never forgot Isabella or stopped loving Elena as his own daughter. His new queen, Princess Alexandra of Thorns-Hire, was kind to Elena and understood the complex circumstances that had brought them together. Isabella spent her early years in prison with dignity and grace, refusing all interviews with journalists and declining opportunities to write memoirs that might have earned money for her legal defense fund. She used her time to study and to work with other prisoners, gradually becoming a respected figure within the prison community. Elena visited the prison regularly for the first 5 years, using her royal privilege to see Isabella despite the legal prohibition against their relationship. These secret meetings were both precious and painful, allowing mother and daughter to maintain their bond while constantly reminding them of everything they had lost. As Elena matured into her role as heir apparent, she developed policies and initiatives that reflected the values Isabella had taught her. She focused particularly on criminal justice reform, working to ensure that other families wouldn't be torn apart by harsh sentences for nonviolent crimes. Her compassion and wisdom made her beloved among the people of Valdoria, who gradually came to see her not as the product of scandal, but as a leader shaped by extraordinary circumstances into someone uniquely qualified to serve. When Isabella became eligible for parole after 15 years, Elena was a grown woman of 30, married to a prince from a neighboring kingdom and mother to 2 small children. The parole hearing was conducted quietly, without the media attention that had surrounded the original trial. Isabella was granted early release based on her exemplary behavior and her positive influence on other prisoners. However, the terms of her parole prohibited her from having any public role or contact with the royal family. She moved to a small cottage in the countryside, where she lived quietly under an assumed name, working as a teacher in a village school. Elena, now mature enough to understand the full complexity of her mother's choices, arranged for anonymous financial support to ensure Isabella's comfort during her remaining years. They never met again officially, but Elena would sometimes disguise herself and watch from a distance as Isabella worked with village children, seeing in her mother's patient teaching the same love and wisdom that had shaped her own character. When Isabella died peacefully at the age of 72, Elena was Queen of Valdoria, having inherited the throne after Marcus's death 5 years earlier. She could not attend the funeral without creating a political scandal, but she arranged for a beautiful memorial garden to be built in Isabella's hometown, with a plaque that read simply, "For those who choose truth over comfort." The kingdom of Valdoria thrived under Elena's rule, benefiting from her unique combination of royal training and hard-won wisdom about the costs of difficult choices. She never forgot the lessons learned from her mother's sacrifice, that truth, however painful, serves justice better than comfortable lies, and that love sometimes requires the courage to let go of those we cherish most. The crown that had once seemed so heavy with the weight of ancient laws became, in Elena's hands, a symbol of redemption and hope. The dynasty that had nearly been destroyed by scandal was ultimately strengthened by leaders who understood that true nobility comes not from bloodline alone, but from the character forged in the fires of impossible choices and unwavering love.